Yeah, Isaiah, the vision of Isaiah, the cherubim, okay? Again, subordinated. When the creatures moved, I heard the sound of their wings like the roar of rushing waters, like the voice of the Almighty. The voice of the Almighty does not, okay, do you see how the sound is not compared to anything that comes through vocals, through a voice box? Did you notice that? Okay. Like the tumult of an army. When they stood still, they lowered their wings. Again, a disconnect. Then there came a voice from above the expanse. Now, remember, does that sound familiar? The expanse. Where does that come from? Genesis. The idea of expanse or firmament. I'll just draw it over here. Expanse. Or firmament. Was considered to be the dividing line between heaven and earth. Right? So the voice of, it says here, the voice came from above the expanse. So, again, the idea, maybe my drawing here isn't exactly perfect, but the idea is that it's above the expanse, which means it's outside the realm of anything you can imagine. Because that which is in the expanse in Genesis is where the birds flew, was considered the sky, right? There was an expanse above, okay? But this is above that. See, I mean, we think, you know, what's interesting about Scripture is that we read this very quickly and we think we want to get to the meat of it, right? But in every word, there's already meaning. That's why you got to dig, you know? And, I'll keep reading. Above the expanse over their head, verse 26, above the expanse over their heads was what looked like a throne of sapphire, and high above on the throne was a figure like that of a man. So you have I'll even add that. And I mean, my translation says, verse 27, I saw that from what appeared to be his waist up, he looked like glowing metal as if full of fire, and that from there down looked like fire, and brilliant light surrounded him. Like the appearance of the rainbow in the clouds on a rainy day, so was the radiance around him. Now I'm going to stop there because there's a couple of metaphors we have to talk about here, and I'm going to pull up my Greek. Because we have this reference, we had it before, I just can't find it fast enough, maybe somebody can. I actually, right at the beginning of 1:4, he says, I looked, I saw a windstorm coming out of the north, an immense cloud. So you have a cloud with flashing light, and now we hear about this cloud again, except the appearance of a rainbow in the clouds on a rainy day, so was the radiance around him. The idea of cloud, I'm just going to take a bit of an aside here. In the ancient Near East, I said this already, that the bigger the statue, the greater the deity. Imagine the more people it took to carry him around in procession, right? It's majestic. This is the Hebrew word for that heavy, well, let me put it to you this way. Let me rephrase what I'm trying to say here. The word in Hebrew in Greek, it's doxa, but in Hebrew, it's kabod. Doxa means glory. Kabod means heavy. Okay? So this is Greek, and this is Hebrew. And I want to make a distinction because what it's saying here is that when you hear about the glory of God, what we're talking about is his heaviness, his weightiness. Okay? Because statues, the bigger the statue, the heavier the statue, the greater the majesty. The greater the weightiness. Imagine, a warrior. A warrior is, with all his armor, shows his glory / heaviness, his robustness, you see my point? I hope I'm making my point clear. And I wanted to tell you this because in 1 Thessalonians, there's this very interesting in Greek. In other words, if you don't believe me, let's go to Thessalonians. I know you believe me, but I'm not going to take that for granted. 1 Thessalonians 1 Thessalonians chapter 2, verses 5 to 7. I'm just going to pull out an RSV because it's a bit better translation than the NIV. But if you'll just bear with me for 1 second, I'll just look this up quickly. Because this is important, and this is something that I would hope that you would appreciate, at least because in the Greek it is evident. So I've got to open my RSV, and I've got my NIV and my Greek. So I want you to hear this. 1 Thessalonians, I'll read it out of the RSV. 2, 5 to 7. It says, this is St. Paul defending himself basically to the Thessalonians. For we never used either words of flattery, as you know, or a cloak for greed, as God is witness. Nor did we seek glory from men, whether from you or from others, though we might have made demands as apostles of Christ. Okay, do you get the idea? That they didn't seek glory, nor did they, but they could have. They could have, as apostles, made demands. That's what he's saying, right? But in Greek, it's very interesting. Now, to my audience, to you and to my audience out in cyber world, I apologize for my Greek pronunciation, but I'll do my best. I'm going to get right to I'm in chapter 1, that's why. So it says here, God is witness, nor seeking from anthropon doxan, nor seeking for men glory. Then it says, noien bare enai hos Christu, apostoloi. This able with weight to be as of Christ. You see? You get the idea that glory and weight are related. Even in the New Testament. So I'm going out of Hebrew and Septuagint Greek, or Old Testament Greek, into the New Testament, that it was understood that glory had to do with weightiness. That's why when we talk about in the Hebrew God's glory, we're talking people identified with stature. Weightiness. But what's oxymoronic about Ezekiel, the book of Ezekiel, is that the glory of God is a cloud. Now, is that, do you see the contradiction in terms? The weightiness of God is a cloud. The majesty, the pomp, the imposition of God is a cloud. Does that not disconnect you from what you're seeing in Babylon? Completely. How is that even possible? The glory of the Lord lifts up from the temple. This is in Kings, etc., etc. How is that possible? As a cloud. It's again, more of a disconnect, but the idea is that there's a reason for that, because the other thing I wanted to say before I get to the last verses is that I need to now make note, or more than make note, accentuate the idea that there's this identification with fire. Did you notice how many times you heard fire? No. Fire, fire, fire. And let me say it now. Translations like to do this. God is fire and light. And So in our minds, we can make the distinction, right? But in the ancient world, fire is light and light is fire. Okay? See the difference? There's no flashlights, there's no LED lights, there's none of that. Fire is light and light is fire. So think about the metaphor, because the metaphor carries the meaning of this. In Isaiah, it calls people, Isaiah chapter 2, it calls the nations. I'll read Isaiah chapter 2, verse, sorry, I'll find it here, yeah. Okay, well, starting in 3. Many peoples will come and say, "Come, let us go up to the mountain of the Lord, to the house of the God of Jacob. He will teach us his ways so that we walk in his paths. The law will go out from Zion, the word of the Lord of Jerusalem. He will judge between the nations and settle disputes for many peoples." And then later on it says, "Come, O house of Jacob, let us walk in the light of the Lord." Okay? But fire is light. Right, Renzo? Fire is light. So if you need light, okay, you have to be close to the fire. But fire burns. Okay? So how do you walk? Think about this. Think about the metaphor. How do you walk in the light of the Lord without getting burnt? Think about that. You have to have light to see. But if things get out of hand, you can burn yourself and actually burn what? One match to torch Olive Row, right? Look at Slave Lake, right? Okay, so how do you do that? Think about this. Think about the metaphor. Metaphors are important. That's why in translations you can't switch things around because I like this better than this and it's the same thing. It may not be the same thing. You got to stick with it. Think about it. How do you walk in the light of God without getting burnt? St. John the Baptist said, he will baptize you in fire and by the Spirit. In spirit and in fire. Fire judges.
Fire burns.
Fire burns. It can burn or it can provide light so you can see. Right? I'll tell you how you do it. You obey the fire. Am I right?
Right.
Notice my choice of words. You obey the fire. You don't consult it. You don't think about it. Let me get back to you on that. Do you see my point? Mm-hmm. You don't outwit it. Okay? You obey it. And that's it. And if you obey the fire, i.e., you're careful with it, you have it so you don't blow it out, then you can see, right? See how the metaphor works. It's very, very powerful metaphor, and it's actually all over the Bible. I mean, write this down. Fire is light and light is fire, and you have to have both to be with God. Okay? But you'll see in the final verses that as we went through, and I'll read you the final verse before we hit chapter 2. And again, very important. So the final verse. This was the appearance of the likeness of the glory of the Lord. So you have likeness. Now, I went on the internet, and I went onto Google Images, and I put Ezekiel's chariot or Ezekiel's wheel or whatever. And you should see all the images. But actually, every one of them without fail is invalid. Because he didn't say that's what it was. He said that's what it's like. That's what it appeared, but that's not what it was. You see how it's one step removed. So he's deconstructing, and he's very skillfully deconstructing. He's giving you an image that's impossible, which means don't imagine it. He's giving you enough for you to realize he's talking about a deity, but he's using metaphors so that you have to be close. I mean, even the throne. I mean, honestly, even the throne, you can't even draw the throne because it says here, where is it here? I lost it for a second. Even the throne there came a voice from above the expanse of the heads. Above the expanse of the heads was what looked like a throne. So you can't even draw a throne. Because if you draw a throne, you're drawing a throne, not what looks like a throne. You see, you have to follow the language. Okay, you might say it's the same thing. You might think it's the same thing, but it's not. Because this especially accentuated in the last portion here. Thus was the appearance of the light. So as closer you get to this one on the throne, this figure, and notice it says a figure. The closer you get, the more language. I mean, imagine, you can hear it. Thus was the appearance of the likeness of the glory of the Lord. So he's not describing the Lord. He's describing the glory of the Lord like the likeness of the appearance. See, you see that? Isn't that amazing? It's absolutely remarkable. So he has skillfully deconstructed any vision of God. And by the way, he came to Ezekiel and only Ezekiel. He did not come to you or me. Right? Because if that was important, he would have done so. You have what you, go read the end of the Gospel of John. But these words are written that you may believe. So in other words, and they are sufficient. You don't need to see. You're not going to see. Because the minute you see something, you're going to be forming idols. Ezekiel saw, and he's making sure he's using language, he's using everything at his disposal to make sure that you don't imagine it. He's putting it always a step, more steps away. The closer you get, the more disconnect there is. And then finally he says, when I saw it, I fell face down and I heard the voice of one speaking. You see? So again, remember I said this before. There's no picture, no vision for us, nothing we can imagine, because it's impossibilities. These are impossibilities. The weightiness of God as a cloud. The idea, again, the metaphors are useful in the fact that, you know, how fire is burns. But we end up with a voice, and voices are heard. So believe it or not, that is what I have in my notes. So I'm a little bit over, I apologize. I wanted to end at 8, but it's 8:10. And I would be happy to, if anybody wants to grab a coffee, I can entertain some questions. Maybe we'll pause the video. Thank you very much. So I just wanted to add one thing from the book of Revelation. Very interesting. In the book of Revelation, again, in Ezekiel and Revelation are very much related. They use similar metaphors, and in Revelation, starting in chapter 1, verse 11, actually, let's start with 10. It says, on the Lord's day I was in the Spirit, and I heard behind me a loud voice like a trumpet. Like a trumpet. Now you'll know what to think, right? Yes. And said, write on a scroll what you see and send it to the 7 churches, to Ephesus, Smyrna, Pergamum, Thyatira, Sardis, Philadelphia, and Laodicea. And then it says, I turned around to see the voice that was speaking to me. Again, an underscoring or an accentuation of the fact that God is for us a voice. Not an idol that we can, not a self-standing idol or something that we can look at to put our hope in. It's something we hear. So anyway, I will entertain any questions that you may have. I'll do my best, as I tried last time. Is there anybody have questions or comments, or did you?
Well, statues would never have spoken.
And that's right, because statues, so what you said is statues would never have spoken. And that's true, and that's addressed in, I have actually a text somewhere here. See if I've written it down. Psalm 135:16. Let's look at Psalm 135:16. So this is in reference to the statues and their function. So beginning in 135:16, I'm in NIV, it says here, well actually we can start at verse 15. I don't know why I put 16. The idols of the nations are silver and gold made by the hands of men. They have mouths but cannot speak, eyes but they cannot see, they have ears but cannot hear, nor is there breath in their mouths. Those who make them will be like them, and so will all of you who trust in them. But Ezekiel's God has no eyes but sees, has no ears but hears, has no hand but has power, has no mouth, did I say has no mouth but can speak? So, I don't know, I mean, that's a comment that you make. Yeah, but this is addressed in Psalms that the idols are nothing. They are nothing. Yes?
So are you saying that God speaks to us?
God does speak to us. Well, let me rephrase that. So the question is, does God speak to us? Absolutely, but I would even rephrase it. And I hope I can find the text quickly enough. He has spoken to us. And I'm going to look in Hebrews quickly here. I'm making the distinction. He does speak to us, but how he's spoken to us. Okay. Hebrews 1, verse 1. In the past, God spoke to our forefathers through the prophets at many times and in various ways. But in these last days, he has spoken to us by his Son, whom he appointed heir of all things, and through him he had made the universe. Now, the reason I'm going to stop there, I mean, that's as far as I need to go. I'm going to check the Greek on that. And I've looked at this before. But so I'm just going to look at the word here. Yeah, okay, so in Greek it says spoke. The Greek word is elaleisen, which is what's called the aorist tense, which for us is the past tense. Aorist in Greek is different from what they call imperfect. So if I say I'm leaving the house, that means that I'm in the process. It hasn't been completed yet. If I say I left the house, it means it's done. Well, this is aorist, which means that everything that Jesus has to say has been said. So if Jesus is whispering into your ear and it doesn't square up with this, it's another Jesus, according to St. Paul in 2 Corinthians.
So do you think that Jesus does speak to the word to us?
Well, okay, does Jesus speak the word to us? Jesus speaks through his word that he has given to us.
So if we don't have the word,
Then if we don't, so the question is if we don't have the word, does he speak to us? Yes, it's called our conscience, and that's addressed in Romans 2. Because the Gentiles who do not have a law within themselves, which will either excuse them or convict them on the day of judgment.
you said a word there in the beginning I didn't grasp, and it was important. Sorry.
That's okay. So I'll repeat. For those who do not have the gospel,
Yes.
what God has given to us through his inscripted, canonized, i.e. this is the foundational text of God communicating to the human being, is our conscience. God has implanted in us a conscience that tells us right or wrong, which according to Romans, let me just pull out the text in Romans. That's and if anybody can find it quicker than I can, by all means, please do. That's in Romans 2. Yeah, it says, I found it here. It says, Romans 2, let's say 14. 2:14. Indeed, when Gentiles who do not have the law, so you understand that the law is the word of God. And I should almost hold that thought for me because I'll forget, unfortunately. Indeed, when Gentiles who do not have the law do by nature things required by the law, they are a law for themselves, even though they do not have the law. Since they show that the requirements of the law are written on their hearts, their consciences also bearing witness, and their thoughts now accusing or even defending them. So what that means is that if you don't have the law of Moses, but you have it by nature, you're following that law. Like you have, let's say, I'm going to go even far as saying common sense mostly. Then that could acquit you on the great day of the Lord. Because you'd have to read, I would invite you to read all of Romans 2 to get the context of this. And you'll see that, but why I said be specific about the law is that when God comes to somebody and speaks to them, He, in the Bible, comes to tell you to do something. Okay? He's not coming to, well, there's a number of ways I go with this, but I'll just throw out a few. He's not, in many ways, He comforts you, but always the end goal is that you, the hearer, would follow His commandments, His statutes, His ordinances, His decrees. That's, He sends you on, or he has you do something, like St. Paul. When he came to St. Paul, I'm sending you to the Gentiles. He didn't come to St. Paul and say, I really liked what you did here, and oh, by the way, I would like you to go here and live there for a while and take this job and, and make some money there and then live a good life and die a happy grandfather. He didn't say that. And he doesn't say that to Isaiah. He doesn't say that to Jeremiah. Time he talks to an individual, it's to do something. Check my work. Okay? Check my work. I hope I answered your question.
Yes, you did.
Okay. Anybody else? All right. Well, this concludes our session for tonight. Thank you very much. God bless you. Drive safe.
Thank you.